All right. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to the Mass MEP webinar series, The ABCs of Returning Safely to Work. This series is presented by Safety Trainers. Today's episode is Navigating the Alphabet Soup of Regulations as We Get Back to Work. I'm Haley Steele. I'm the marketing coordinator with Mass MEP, and I will be your moderator for our webinar this afternoon. So welcome. We have a couple of people behind the scenes with us today. We have Christy Grignon is our marketing director at Mass MEP, and Matt Healy is our information technology manager. They are kind of like our wizards in The Wizard in Oz. So they put all this together for us. Today, our panelists that we'd like to introduce is Darcy Cook. She is the owner of Cook Professional Resources. We know them as Safety Trainers, but to us, we know Darcy as, she's also known to us as our safety expert, and she's the OSHA know-all. We like to have her around and a great insight provided. We use her at Mass MEP, so it's great to have her with us. So thanks for joining us. As you can see, your mics are muted. You will be able to engage with us this afternoon through, we will have polls popping up, and you also have your chat option. Those of you that can see below, there's the chat bubble. What we will use the chat option, as we like to say in the webinar biz, you can use this to chat amongst yourselves. This is an area that will allow, obviously, all of you to get together today and share your questions, thoughts, and ideas. We have a variety of different industries with us, so it's a great place for you to get on there and set out some questions, and your peers can answer. We do have polls. They will pop up throughout the webinar. We will have them on a time limit, and once they have closed, we'll post the results, and then Darcy is able to use those results in conjunction with her webinar content. We have an hour set aside for the webinar today, as we feel that's plenty of time for the content. But that being stated, please understand that we will move fast, as this initial webinar is to provide you an overview. In this overview, there may be some items that you may see today that may prompt you to have different people from within your organization to attend the next 4 episodes. So after this, we have 4 more episodes, and each of those episodes will be a deeper dive into specifics that Darcy will present. They will each be a half an hour of content, and those will have Q&A time at the end for discussion. So if you haven't already registered for those 4 webinars, the registration links will be posted in the chat bubble at the end of the webinar. Upon completion of this webinar, you will receive a notification to complete an evaluation. These evaluations are important for us at Mass MEP. It helps us provide data for trainings such as these and insight for continuous improvement on the training content that is delivered by our internal staff and by our third parties such as Darcy. We are recording the webinar today for proprietary and internal training purposes. After completion of this series, so after we've done all 5 of these webinars, we will be making the videos available through a private link. Upon completion of all 5 evaluations, you will be provided with that link to access the videos. But due to the importance of this subject matter, we really recommend that you reach out to a Mass MEP trusted advisor or to Safety Trainers directly, Darcy, for a one-on-one meeting to review the details provided. Our contact information we'll put up at the end of the webinar as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the webinar over to our panelist, Darcy Cook with Safety Trainers, and this is Navigating the Alphabet Soup of Regulations as We Get Back to Work. Let's begin.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. I would love to be in a room with all of you, seeing you and engaging in a different kind of way. But under the circumstances, this is our new way of communicating and doing business. So, Haley, thank you. You did a great job setting the expectations for this webinar. I am all about expectations. At the end of the time that you're spending with me today, what's going to be in your pockets? What are you going to really be able to do with this information? Oh, how about the fact that I have the wrong PowerPoint up on the screen? How's that for preparation, you guys? I apologize. So I want you guys to know exactly what what the take home is going to be for you and what you're going to be able to walk away with. This is by no means going to answer every single one of your questions, but it absolutely is going to get you guys starting the conversation and being able to check the pulse of your company. What do I mean by pulse of your company? I want you to think about this as a 1, 3, and 5 kind of situation. As I'm walking you through all the pieces and parts, I want you to be able to say to me, Darcy, the 1 is we've got nothing in place. We have to talk about this as a team. We really have to look at what we're doing and how we're doing it. And then number 2, there we go. So, sorry guys. Number 3 is going to be, we've got some things in place, but based on some information that you shared with us today, we realized that we missed some things and that we needed to go back and make some updates or changes because we didn't even think about that. And then a 5 is check the box. Been there, done that. We're rock solid. We're good to go. So my objective today is to take you through some information. You're going to take a pulse of your organization. Are you a 1 or 3 or 5 in these areas? This information is not Darcy Cook's opinion. I went and basically I've been reading, as all of you have. I've been reading and reading and reading and listening and reading to all the different regulators and all the different experts in this field. What I've just done is gone and sorted it all for you. I've kind of basically organized it in a way that will make it a little easier for me to present it to you today, and hopefully you can take action. Some of you, safety is not your full-time job. It is something else on your to-do list. We recognize that in manufacturing, that sometimes you're in charge of operations and HR and safety, or it's a small group of you. It's your operations person plus your HR person, and maybe it's the owner or the CFO or someone that's kind of managing the safety umbrella of it. Definitions. So when my company was around in 9/11, we had a whole bunch of new words that were put into the dictionary. Now we're talking about Wikipedia. And so we're seeing new terminology and new definitions enter as a result of the pandemic, mostly around, COVID-19 and social distancing, a new definition around what social distancing is. We're going to be talking about FDA, EPA, DPH, CDC, OSHA, and a whole bunch of other World Health Organization as the experts, as the individuals who have given us the information that we need to use. So one of the challenges is they don't specifically spell stuff out for you. Step 1, step 2, step 3. They're a little vague, and then you got to read between the lines. One of the things about safety and health is that there are no 2 companies that are identical. 2 McDonald's are not the same. 2 manufacturers who do the same widgets are not the same. 2 mechanics are not the same. 2 restaurants are not the same. So the part for some of you who are not heavily involved in safety in your organization is understanding what applies and what doesn't apply to your organization, and that you've got some flexibility in making some decisions, that you get to choose how to cross the finish line. So up on the screen in front of you, you will see that I basically have put a bunch of federal law, right, across the middle. You've got OSHA, FDA, EPA, and DOT. And above it, I put CDC guidelines, because right now the CDC is kind of guiding us and directing us around face masks, coverings of your face, social distancing, and of course the universal idea of hand washing and what to do if someone tests positive or potentially came in contact with someone that tested positive. So they're kind of leading the way in terms of actionable items. But if you go to the second row, when it's all said and done, when the excitement and the fear starts to settle around COVID-19, and we have to start operating our businesses, taking control of the phase 1, and what does phase 2, 3, and 4 look like for sustainability of our organizations, we have to go back to what's already in place. And of the regulators or the laws that I've kind of posted here, OSHA is the only organization designed to protect your employees. So OSHA is all about the safety and health and you providing a safe and health workplace for your employees. And with that being said, it's going to be the foundation of which I want you to look at building and the change, building your COVID-19 safety site plan. We're gonna stem from all the OSHA regulations. So for those of you who are already following, complying, have written documentation, regular trainings around the standards that apply to your organization, your manufacturing company, this will be a little easier transition for you. It'll be an easier to implement into existing things that you already have. If you're an organization that hasn't really looked at your policies and procedures for a while, again, it's been a shared responsibility, you might have a little bit more work that needs to be done. So in this hierarchy, I've taken into consideration all of the pieces and parts from all of these regulatory agencies, as well as we're now working with the DPH and Mass.gov, right, the Reopening Advisory Board for the state of Massachusetts, and what their recommendations are going to be and their expectations of how businesses are going to function. What I will say to you is your trade organizations are doing an exceptional job. I have been reading a lot of trade organization stuff related to, manufacturing. I've been reading the restaurant industry. I've been reading the dental organization. I've been reading all of these different trade organizations. And because they know what you do, they know how you do it, they're giving some really great, really specific, tangible, put in your pocket kinds of advice. So if you aren't part of your trade organization right now, I'm going to give a shout out to them. This is a really good time for you to be involved with them. So today is really about changing the way we are doing business. We can no longer go to work and operate the same exact way we were operating. So I'm going to take you through a whole bunch of different pieces and parts today so you can start talking to your team and thinking about what changes do you want to make, what changes do you need to make. When you go to make a change, the expectation is that you will do at least the minimum requirements written by federal law or by what the CDC is recommending or what our governor is recommending. The expectation is that you guys are going to meet the minimum compliance. Now, each of you could step it up one step or even 2 or 3 steps, meaning if we say, let me use it. So 6 foot social distancing is the number. But if you decide that you want it to be a bigger distance, you can make it a bigger distance. If we decide that the come back to work is a 14-day quarantine, but you want to make it a bigger number, you could make it a bigger number. If you want to make your policies a little stricter, prolonged contact. So in the footnotes of everything that you're reading with CDC, you'll see that they're trying to define out and explain to you the definitions behind it. And you'll see that prolonged contact has been a lot of talk and controversy in terms of, well, is that 10 minutes next to someone who might have been potentially infected, or is it 30 minutes? Do we take an average? Do we take our PPE into consideration when we come up with that number? So there is some flexibility around the choices and decisions that you guys are making for
Darcy, it's Christy. I just wanted to jump in. People are seeing a gray box across the presentation.
I think the drop down keeps dropping down every time someone posts in a chat. Is it there now?
Yep, there's 3 of them. There's one right in the middle, there's one to the right, and there's one at the top. Oh, one's gone.
Okay, so that's the polling question. We just got rid of that one.
Keep moving that one.
This is the picture of all of you guys, so that one's gone. What else are we seeing?
That's it.
There's one at the top. Yeah, that guy right there.
Okay, this is the drop down controls.
Okay, that one's not blocking us, so we're good.
Perfect. Thanks for everyone for letting us know. Okay, we can accommodate pretty quickly. So, quick definition. This definition is more important to you than you recognize because it should be the foundation of how you're making your choices and decisions. So OSHA says, hey, Darce, what is the hazard? What is the risk to the employees right now? And ultimately, we are trying to decrease the risk and decrease the exposure of someone coming in contact with someone and or catching COVID-19 in our building. That's what we're trying to do. So if the definition tells us that it's by people coming in close contact, ultimately it's my cough, my sneeze, my spit, my saliva, right? If it's getting on your desk or on your tools, if I'm not in my elbow, even with a mask on, that is how someone might touch it and then touch their face and get it into their eyes, nose, or mouth. Or we're understanding that if I'm coughing it into the air and I don't have a mask and you walk through my mist, you actually inhale it, then you might catch COVID-19. So the idea is that all of the choices and decisions you're making in your company are to create separation and to decrease the likelihood that you and I are going to come face to face. The likelihood that I'm going to cough or sneeze or spit all over your desk and your tools, okay? So make sure that you understand that that is the goal and the objective behind the plan. And that's where the 6-foot boundary is that they've come in place. It's why we're talking about really good hand washing. One of the tips I'll just tell you is if you want to even do it with your family at home for fun, for $4 on Amazon, or have them deliver you a black light, and wash your hands and then show your kids and your husband and your wife and everyone else what their hands still look like. Putting soap in the palm of your hand and going like this with a quick rinse, those days are over. We actually need to teach our employees how to hand wash correctly. Now, you guys know the timeline, right? It's 20 seconds and sing a song or whatever the case may be. But there's actually a technique behind it, between cleaning between our fingers and rubbing a certain way to get our fingernails. And of course, you guys are going to be making rules about potentially, how much jewelry we have on, or if I am wearing jewelry, I've got to clean under that jewelry and take it off at the sink, wash it and clean it and put it back on. I mean, there's more things to think of than ever before when it's related to the hidden viruses and bacteria that are out there. We've never had to do this before. Cold and flu season never caused us to kind of step up to this level of infectious control that we are talking about. So the word is infectious control, and most of us, that really has always just sat with the healthcare industry. And so OSHA's writings and laws and standards around infectious control are pretty much focused for healthcare. Now we're starting to see that. We're going to see that as commonplace, everyday kinds of conversations moving forward, especially during this whole phase 1 and phase 2 of getting back to work. And most of us do not have an infectious control program in place, and it might be scary. What you do have, though, so hold on because I'm going to get there. What you do already have is a bloodborne pathogens standard that OSHA wrote that applies to every single company on this webinar. And that bloodborne pathogen standard, along with your exposure control plan that goes with that bloodborne pathogen standard, can be the easy foundation of where you're going to start to build out and put a plan in place under infectious control and disinfecting and all these new words that we're using. Number 1, step 1, you ready? We're going to kind of jump into this. If you've got a pen and paper with you, I'm going to just kind of spell out all the areas that you guys need to be having conversation as a team, and of course, making these changes. The first thing is, who's going to be a Darcy in your company? I read every single day, get on the 12 o'clock, with the governor, what's the updates, what's the changing, what's OSHA posting, what's CDC posting. Someone's got to stay up on that. And I know a lot of the HR departments right now, because we've had lots of conversations, are taking that on, but this isn't going away. You're going to have to designate, do you have a safety committee already in place? Did you create a pandemic task force within that? Is there going to be a safety coordinator? Do you have a safety person? They're going to have a partner in crime who's now going to be the COVID-19 safety site plan manager. Did you put an emergency management team? I don't care what you call yourselves. If it's 1 person, 3 people, 5 people, you just have to create an organized manner of which you are going to start to handle all of the communication and changes. See, once you guys build this foundation, it's not static. It's not done. It's not over. Sadly, we've been moving so quickly that in some cases we've got daily changes. This team has to kind of stay on top of that and be able to make changes within your company, whether we have, good changes and we're decreasing controls, or we've got some bad stuff or increased areas of concern and we've got to increase our controls. But who's that team? So that's number one on your list. This back to work advisory board put out these 4 phases. To me, obviously, I like bullet points. I like actionable items. I want to know what's in my pocket and what do I got to go do today. So these are still a little vague for me. So I'm going to kind of take an initiative today. The reason you're here is I'm going to take a little bit of an initiative using OSHA as your foundation, and I'm going to give you all of your bullet points on how to start. So I'm just going to put this slide up. I gave credit where credit's due. In phase 1, in the reopening of the advisory board, this is pulled right off of their website. Look at all the things I've highlighted in blue, because these blue pieces are what I'm going to break down actually in today's webinar a little bit, but more in detail in the next 4 webinars. We've got to talk about social distancing. What are all the rules we're putting in place, and how are we redesigning our building to maintain 6 feet? And when we can't, what are the rules associated with being less than 6 feet? The protocols for social distancing, that's what we just said. There's going to be a standard operating procedure in your buildings. Signage. You're going to need to put up twice as many signs that you've ever had before about PPE, wearing it, enter, exit, washing hands. All your bathrooms, this is not just for the restaurant industry. Every single one of your bathrooms should have signs in it that tell your employees that they should be washing their hands. Now you're going to have to put the PPE signage up. There might be limitations to the number of people that you can have in meeting rooms. On the front doors, what do you want your vendors to do, your package FedEx delivery people to do? You're going to have to put signage everywhere. We'll talk about that. Face coverings and masks, obviously, hand washing. Someone's got to be looking at your supply chain. The isopropyl alcohol, the hand sanitizer, the face masks or coverings that you're using, the cleaning and disinfecting. Where are you getting those supplies? That's got to be part of the conversation. And sanitization. So your bathrooms, are we keeping them open? Are we keeping them closed? Are we every other urinal? Are we closing off every other urinal? Are we closing off every other sink? Do we have enough bathrooms? Do we have them spaced out enough? What does that all look like? And sanitation also is going to cover trash. Who's taking out the trash? At what point do we stop filling up the trash? Do we put liners in our trash bags now because we don't have to disinfect and clean out our trash cans? Everyone's got tissues. Take your own tissue, throw it in your own. There's all these new conversations that you have to ask under these engineering and administrative controls. And so they did a pretty good job kind of marking these off, training. How do we report to work? Do we report to work? Who do we call? Return to work? At what point can I? What do those rules look like? And then, of course, the cleaning and disinfecting piece. So they did give you guys a little bit of a clue. They did give you an indication of the conversations that you need to be having and the parameters that you're going to put in place for each of your organizations. This is what OSHA has out and available to you right now. Okay, it is a guide for COVID-19. The messaging behind it, what I like about it is that if you go to what they're calling the risk area, so they've classified companies and businesses as in terms of COVID-19, in terms of what level of risk do you guys have at your manufacturing facility. And the good news is you guys are in the low risk category. So the recommendations that they've made around that are super reasonable. So this document is a link here at the top. You can Google those words and it'll pop right up. It helps to give you an idea of, again, how to continue this conversation. The other part about OSHA, just like the CDC, is they're putting lots of free materials out there and posters and signs, and you guys have to do more training. You're going to need to document training. And in doing more training and documenting training, they've actually helped you to kind of create these one-page sheets that actually could be the format of a safety briefing. In manufacturing, with things changing so quickly, I'm going to put out there that you suggest that you get a few minutes before a line or a schedule starts, or the front office, like a little team huddle. And you guys give any updates at that moment in time with changes that you've made from the building, because with things quickly changing, you might not have plexiglass up in one of your assembly line areas, but now you do. You might not have had arrows on the floor telling you that we're controlling flow of traffic now in our building, but now we do. And so you're going to need a way to constantly be communicating. So think about that. What is our way to communicate? Are we texting employees? Are we emailing employees? Some employees are at work, some people aren't at work. Are we putting newsletters out? Where's your employees staying up to speed on that? And I think that you can do two things at the same time: communication and training. If you implement these 5-10 minute get-togethers at the beginning or start of your day by department in terms of what's changed or what's different, so that you guys can stay ahead of this, at least during the phase one, right? At least during phase one, because there's going to be so many questions by so many different people. So some of you, your doors have been open and you've continued through this. Others actually have really scaled back, or they did shut down, and now they're looking on how do they restart up again and how do they bring back staff. So OSHA's websites are going to give you guys free resources. And of course, if you're citing OSHA and reading from OSHA and training from OSHA, who can argue with that? So here's the next two slides. The next two slides are the list of standards that apply to you related to COVID-19. So I pulled them out. Remember the safety book, if I have one really close by, I don't. The safety book is like, the OSHA book is like this thick. So basically, I wanted to pull out standards right now that you guys should be looking at and getting familiar with. Number one, record keeping. The second one is personal protective pieces of equipment. Respiratory protection. If you have N95 respirators, not masks. If you have N95 respirators in your building, you must understand the respiratory protection program is and the standard around what you have to do. Unless you already have a hazard, welding, paint coating, spray booths, silica, unless you already had an existing hazard which required you to have N95 masks in your building, please do not rush out to go buy N95 masks if you're not a healthcare organization. We will talk about that in detail in one of our webinars in terms of who, what, when, where, and costs associated with that and risk. You also, signage, there's a section here on signage, and we're going to talk about this general duty clause that's listed right there at the bottom, because that comes down under enforcement. Get the page. The next standards are your housekeeping standards, hazardous communications standard. Hazardous communications is making sure everyone understands what the labels mean on the chemicals you're bringing in the building. You all should be looking for EPA approved products to disinfect against COVID-19. You should be going on the EPA's website. That's where you find out what ones are approved. And then when you bring those into your building, you need to train your staff on them, show them the labels, make sure if you guys are buying big gallon. I mean, one of the challenges is right now that you might have to be buying big gallon containers of things. You can't get individual. You guys got to take whatever you can get right now in terms of supply chain. So where you were maybe getting individual bottles, now you can't, and you're going to have to get big gallon size things. If you got to take gallons and break them down into smaller bottles, you have to have an understanding of what hazardous communication is. You have to have an understanding what secondary labeling looks like. You have to make sure that you have training in place. And you got to look at those safety data sheets, because if they're telling you that you need to be using PPE to do disinfecting or use it in a certain way or store it in a certain way. So one of the things I've been talking about is that most people don't realize that isopropyl alcohol and hand sanitizer are flammable. And so the NFPA, National Fire Prevention Association, under their 30 standard is basically telling you, you guys need to have flammable cabinets. So if you guys have 5 gallons of any combination of this, you went and bought a bunch of it, now you've got it, and you're excited that you have it, but you can't just be keeping this on regular shelves. So again, part of another conversation that we're going to have. First aid, you all need to have a first aid team. This is not new. This is part of the standard. Now we have to train your first aid team in terms of what happens if someone gets sick or injured at work, taking into consideration the precautions associated with COVID-19, hands-only CPR, isolation rooms, sick spaces. This is a whole new area that you will have to develop if you don't already have something in place. your emergency action plan, your exposure control plan, and bloodborne pathogens. These are great foundational documents that you guys are going to be able to build this from. So enforcement, OSHA is not going to show up at your door right now, unless, sadly, unless there is a fatality, which we're not having a fatality in your company, right? But under COVID-19, employees have a right to call OSHA on you if they don't think that you are protecting them, that you aren't doing what you need to do to create a safe and health environment. As you can imagine, OSHA, when this started, had thousands and thousands of phone calls. And those phone calls, they couldn't possibly run out to every single company and start to open up investigations. So right now, OSHA has a letter out that basically says, look, we need to focus on the highest risk. Remember, manufacturing, I told you in OSHA's hierarchy, you guys are low risk. So we got to focus on the highest risk, the people right on the front line with COVID-19, and those doctors, nurses, EMTs, paramedics, mortuary people. If they're having issues, then we need to support them because they're the highest risk right now. Now, it's not saying that you won't get a letter from OSHA. You can definitely get a letter from OSHA. And that might be exactly what you see. And then they're going to ask you to submit documentation and information to support the phone call or the referral that they got about you not being compliant or safe related to COVID-19. The other thing is because there is not an infectious control COVID-19 law, like something super tangible right now, there's bits and pieces of it throughout OSHA. This is something that would get cited under what we call the general duty clause in terms of citations. So don't get, I mean, if you guys are on this webinar, we know that you guys are the ones who are taking action and doing what you can do to keep your employees safe. If you do get a letter from OSHA, respond, give them the documentation. If you need support and help with that, reach out to us. We'll help you walk through what you need to do and how you need to do it. So this is the foundation. This is the beginning of you guys identifying that COVID-19 is a hazard and what you need to do with it. So I created this hierarchy of controls. Now, if you're in safety, you've seen this a ton of time, especially with OSHA. And OSHA doesn't want you guys just putting the mask on everyone. If you look, this is an upside down triangle. Where is PPE? It's not at the top. It's not the first line of defense. It's the last line of defense. So although we're all talking about mask right now, as a business owner, as the executive team in charge of making these choices and decisions, you guys can't just slap PPE on everyone and call it a day. We need to make changes within the organization that allow us to decrease the risk and decrease the exposure. And if the risk and exposure still exists, then we can add PPE to the mix. So first thing we all did, right? If it's my company and you are all my employees, and I don't want you to catch COVID-19 in my workplace, what did? I sent y'all home, okay? So a lot of companies did that. We sent you guys all home. And then after we sent you all home, we said, hey, we can't stay closed forever, and we are in the business to make money, but we got to create a safe and health environment. So guess what? We know social distancing is important. So some of you get to stay home and work from home, and some of you have to come back because your job can't be done from home. And for those of you who are coming back to work, we're not done. We're still going to make this a safe place for you. We're going to put engineering controls in place. This is how we're going to reorganize the flow of traffic. This is where we're going to take out chairs in the break room. This is where we're going to change the lobby setting. This is where we're going to decrease how many times something is touched potentially in an assembly. This is where our administrative staff is going to go to paperless documentations. We're not taking one piece of paper and passing it around the office anymore. We're going to increase airflow. How fast can we change out the air safely in our building and instead of letting the air sit and rotate out every 3 hours or 5 hours, let's increase that airflow and make it happen a little bit quicker. All engineering things that we need to put in place. I've added an extra line to this hierarchy controls. I told you I did modify this. This is Darcy's version. I added warnings in before administrative controls because what we need to do is we need to post like crazy all over the place to give a visual reminder to our employees about what they're supposed to be doing and what they shouldn't be doing, because this is all new behavior. What did they say? It takes 21 days, right, of changing everything to create a new behavior. So let's look at postings, and then next is your administrative controls. Your administrative controls, I call those the rules. It's your sandbox, and I want you to, for your business, remember, two companies are not created equal. guidelines, the changes that I'm going to put in here for my company might not be the same as yours, and that's okay. But you do need to put some directives in here. You know, are we only doing meetings over the web? Are you going to let vendors back in your building? Clearly, we're not going to do handshaking anytime soon. We're going to limit the number of people in a space or a room. We're going to alternate the schedule in terms of people coming in and out. Everyone has to park facing forward. You can't have one person parking this way, one person parking this way, and you guys get out and chit chat in that really tight space. What are all the rules that we're going to lay out in bullet point? And then in our safety briefings, email out, talk to, and train our employees in. And then we're going to get to this PPE at the very, very bottom, what that all looks like. All right. Record keeping. So here's the thing about record keeping. Again, if you're familiar with OSHA, you're doing your OSHA logs. COVID-19 is a recordable illness, but there are specific criteria. That means if someone caught or I don't use the word, I can't think of the word, got. That's not a good word either. But if I ended up with COVID-19 and we can prove that I contracted it, there we go, at work, it was a result of work-related being at work. Maybe there's 2 or 3 of us in the same shift and we all have it. That would be a good indication, because it's hard for you. I'm one to know whether or not I caught it at home, right? I'm still going to the grocery store. I'm still doing things with my kids. You know, my family's still working, so we all come into our household. If you have one case, okay, and there's a criteria, one case is not going to set off the, you know, we need to put this on the, you know, OSHA recordable. But if you have multiple cases, especially multiple cases showing up in a department or in a shift, then you need to be looking at this as the new word is what? Contact tracing. I call it incident investigation. They call it contact tracing. You're going to ask people, you're going to find out where people are, you're going to see where maybe your process broke down, you're going to see where you need to change your process. Remember I said that foundation? Who's going to be your COVID coordinator? Who's going to look at and do the investigation around someone who's tested positive and make recommendations for change. Now, in terms of the record keeping, again, OSHA is really focused on the healthcare industry and not so much on you and I. So the common cold and flu is not something that you've ever recorded on your OSHA log, nor do you ever need to record that, but COVID-19 does fall into a category where you probably, if you're in charge of OSHA logs, you probably want to go on OSHA's site, you probably want to read more information about the record keeping section and get a sense of how this is potentially going to require you to write up a plan, a program, a root cause, you know, a documentation trail, conversations. The one thing we're never short of is paperwork when it comes to safety, especially when we're dealing with something new like this. Next is your exposure control plan. So your exposure control plan is probably, like I said, the closest thing that you have to kind of just writing in and adding your COVID-19 changes into the mix of it. Because the bloodborne pathogen standard talks about how you catch and contract, you know, skin on skin, objects, eating, breathing in the air, bodily fluids. I did a quick bullet point for you. So these are elements of the exposure control plan as you pull them out of OSHA standard, okay? Here they are. So you need to have a way to document and record what the exposure was to the employee. Accident investigation usually, right? We talk about universal precautions. I've been using the word engineering administrative controls throughout this presentation. You're going to get more comfortable with it if you've never been comfortable with those. Personal protective equipment, housekeeping, hepatitis B vaccination. By the way, your first aid team and anyone doing trash, anyone who potentially come in contact with blood or other potentially infectious material, urine, feces, snot, sweat, all that great stuff, employees who have that as part of their job description should be offered a hepatitis B vaccination. I don't know what the future holds. Let me get to the next slide, because I put that up there to talk about what does the future hold with COVID-19 testing. You need to have a post-evaluation and a follow-up process under the bloodborne pathogen exposure. It needs to be training, communication, record keeping, and of course an evaluation on how we reassess, is our process working here? Let me show you the modifications I made to it when I went ahead and added COVID-19, so it's a little easier for you to see how this slides into place along the way. So here's the same thing, elements of an exposure control plan plus COVID-19. So first thing is you're gonna write into the process of which you identify or someone tells you that they potentially are infected or they came in contact with someone who potentially was infected or they are infected. Build that into your exposure control plan. In your universal precautions, now write how we're now washing our hands 20 seconds. Now write that we're washing our hands and we've demonstrated that we're jewelry issues or hot water versus cold water or whatever it is. We've got to be more detailed about our hand washing procedure. And of course, universal precautions is social distancing. So add a definition about what social distancing means in your building. How far is it in that section? Under the PPE, you guys are going to be adding in face coverings, surgical masks, respirators if you're using it, but you're going to talk about it related to COVID-19. You can have face coverings in your company as the barrier for COVID-19. It doesn't have to be a surgical mask. It doesn't have to be a dust mask. And it definitely does not need to be a respirator, an N95 for COVID-19 protection. Again, unless you're on the front lines of the healthcare. So in your exposure control plan right now, you aren't talking about face coverings. So what's the rule around face coverings? How often do we change them out? How often do you want to wash them? How do we put them on? How do we take them off? How do I get a new one? Same thing with surgical masks. Are we throwing them out? They're disposable. There's a rule that actually says we can use them a little bit longer. So are we using them a little bit longer? Build this into your exposure control plan. Now, disinfecting, it's not cleaning. It's a whole new word. It's disinfecting. Cleaning is picking up paper off the floor. Cleaning is this dirt and we sweep it up. This is called disinfecting. It's what we can't see and all those contact surfaces. So build into this exposure control plan. How are you disinfecting? How often are you disinfecting? What are the contact surface areas that you're doing? How's it getting done? Is it employees doing it? You're hiring a third party. Do you have already a third party on board with you who is going to come in the event that I test positive? I test positive. Now we've got to what? Really disinfect that. Are you guys doing that? Are we hiring the third party to come in? What's the plan? So if you haven't had anyone to test positive yet, that's awesome. Hope that's the case because you're putting all these things in place and the goal is that nobody tests positive in your building. But if it does, you've got to have the backup plan. Now, I am absolutely not saying, please hear me, I am not saying that your company is going to be required in the future to pay for COVID-19 testing. I'm not saying that. However, what we need to be thinking about is who's our occupational health relationships. We send our people to DOT testing. We send them for respiratory fit testing and medical clearance. We send them for hepatitis B vaccinations because we're required to give them that. Could the future of regulation require us to do something? Maybe your company has always offered cold and flu vaccinations as a benefit. I don't know, but I want you guys thinking about what the future holds. We don't have anything in writing yet about some of the new laws that are going to play a part, especially under OSHA. Post-evaluation and follow-up. So if you get exposed to blood or potentially infectious material, a needle stick, there's a whole process that needs to happen with that. Well, guess what? CDC has already given us the process to follow for return to work, testing positive or potential exposures. Build that into this plan. And then communication and training, well, add the posters related to the COVID-19 that need to go up, the hand washing that needs to go up, the new personal protective pieces of equipment information that needs to go up, and the record keeping. So now I just want you to know that there's a difference between first aid and OSHA recordables. And again, if that's you in your company, make sure you're rock solid about understanding the difference between first aid and an OSHA recordable. And maybe you should take a look at what's in your first aid kits and are we letting our employees use our first aid kits as a personal medicine cabinet? As an employee, I should only be going there if I've had an injury incident at work and I need medical care and I'm documenting in the first aid log that something happened at work and this is what I took out and this is what I did. A lot of companies are a little bit more relaxed around that. Maybe you want to stay that way. Maybe you want to take a look at making some changes. And then of course, evaluation. So they call it contact tracing. I just call it your incident investigation, your root cause. So Darcy, was exposed and maybe others got exposed. We're going to use incident investigation to track that down, isolate it, control it, fix it, and correct it so that we decrease the risk of it happening again. That's what OSHA wants you to do. If we have an incident, we look at it, we evaluate it, we make changes, and we put something new in place to decrease the risk of it happening again. Now, this is your emergency action plan. So remember, there are two kinds of emergency actions. There's threatening, life-threatening, and non-life-threatening. So when we closed down your businesses and you had to leave and shut your doors for an extended period of time, yes, of course you guys could come back. But I hire people who know their job better than me. And so in the manufacturing world, I bet you it would be really hard for one person to come back and shut things down or turn things off. Now, I'm sure you needed to send your facilities and plant people back, and they needed to stay there, or they continued to stay there to make sure that critical operations happening within the building didn't cause another hazard or exposure or a leak or another problem for your organization. That is part of building out your emergency action plan. So here in the emergency action plan, highlighted the areas really quick for you: reporting, evacuation procedures, critical plant shutdown. How do we account for all of our employees? What are the medical responsibilities outside of our building when we've been evacuated, and who's in charge of that? Who are we contacting for support and resources internally and externally? Who are all our supporters that are going to help bring us to aid? Food, toilets, tents, medical, priests, police, fire, electrical. Who are those resources that we need to have on our team? And of course, alternate sites. Here in New England, if it's a nice warm sunny day and we've had to evacuate the building, that's great. But what if it's pouring rain? What if it's snowing? So on and so forth. You should already have a fundamental emergency action plan. And your emergency action plan probably covers workplace violence and fire and severe weather and structural damage and so on and so forth. But you guys never thought about COVID-19. So in your emergency action plan, you guys now need to add a section related to COVID-19, which is a non-life-threatening evacuation of your building. And what does that look like? So your employees obviously have to have a way to report that they have come in contact or are, we've kind of said that, evacuation. Now, I'm in your building. I am not able to drive. I was dropped off. I'm sharing a car. My car is in the shop. I take the bus route to come to work to you. I get sick. We need to immediately isolate me. So if I can't be escorted off the property immediately, assuming that I have symptoms or that I've been in contact and there's a possibility I have COVID-19, where are you guys putting me? What's the sick room? What's the isolation room? What's the procedures around that? How are you getting me out of the building? Who's going to clean that space after? I mean, there's a whole piece that you guys need to be thinking about related to this. Critical operations, we kind of talked about that. You guys were running half mast, and so a lot of people are probably wearing hats, keeping things going. I know that one of our large hotels had to keep sending manufacturing because their pools had to keep being cleaned and turned over. So think about what that looks like. I'm sure you guys unfortunately had you learned under fire over the last 2 months a lot about emergency action planning. Accounting for your employees. The challenge for you guys right now is some are at home, some are at work, and if there was an emergency and we didn't want people to show up at work and there was an emergency and we wanted people to leave, how are we communicating? Probably another lesson that was really learned. One thing that we've learned is a lot of lessons in the last 2.5 months. Probably figured out a way how to account and of course how to communicate with our employees. The medical piece, well, some of you just found out that you actually are supposed to have a first aid trained person in your company. That team is also in an emergency action situation going to now need to help outside the building. So do you have your portable first aid kits? What are the trainings that we're teaching them? Of course, everyone right now should be moving to our hands only, no breaths. Should someone in your facility collapse, maybe this is a time you guys want to be looking at purchasing an AED. So all new kinds of conversations that you guys need to be starting to have around these topics. So here's the first aid piece I just mentioned. Might want to consider getting an AED now. How about not therapeutic oxygen, but emergency use oxygen? I do have manufacturers who have oxygen in their building, and they have trained their staff in it in terms of their first aid team, and they use it. Maybe that's something you guys want to consider or look at. Maybe, again, you got to create the sick room, maybe access to first aid. How about going to your first aid kits and just making sure you have lots of extra gloves in there, maybe a face shield in there, because if someone's sick and they cough, spit, and vomit, maybe it's not just the eye protection that we need now, but we actually need a face shield added. The first aid program is got many breakdown compartments. You can snap a picture of it right here if you want to. So we've got to train our team. They need to understand bloodborne pathogens, universal precautions. You got to do their first aid and CPR training. You might get an AED or not. They've got to understand the emergency action plan. They've got to practice. So, you know, in OSHA standards, they talk about the, you know, fire drill, fire evacuation drill. You guys at this stage should be doing more than just fire drills. You should be doing first aid emergencies, non-threatening situations, and you guys should actually be practicing and walking people out the building, especially since you guys are about to change how the flow is. Normally, this door would be open, or I'd be moving in this direction, or normally this wouldn't be here or that wouldn't be here in terms of how you guys are placing pallets on your floor. You're going to be redesigning and reorganizing the layout. That's going to take people a little bit of time to get used to. So you need to go back and look at the maps on your wall in the redesign to decrease the amount of touches or expand space and keep people 6 feet apart. Did you guys block exit path routes to get out of the building? And do we have to change that? And if we do, there's a ripple effect associated with that. Changing maps, training people, and looking what needs to happen. And of course, do you have the right equipment stamped by the right people? If you're not familiar with ANSI or NIOSH, those are the organizations that you want stamped. Beware of vendors selling you stuff on the internet that says OSHA approved. OSHA doesn't approve PPE, so don't buy from companies that say this is OSHA approved. Look for and build relationships with reputable vendors. So we want you to have good relationships. Hopefully you already have them, and if you don't, then seek out to Mass MEP and find out good reputable people that are going to make sure that you are getting what you paid for, and that the things that the PPE is supposed to do, it actually does for you. So that's a big part of the PPE program, is, you know, creating that supply chain and being able to know that you're going to get the stuff when you want the stuff. What happens if it runs out? You've got to have a backup plan, or maybe you have to change your operations and retrain your staff because we no longer have hand sanitizer right now, so we have to, you know, increase our hand washing, or whatever the case might be. The signage. What kind of signs are we putting around, Darcy? Where are we going to put the signs? The signs start outside in your parking lot. The signs start outside your building where people are entering and exiting, and what you want me to do. So the directive, you know, what PPE do I need to wear? Social distancing signs, no handshaking, you know, warnings in terms of what I need to do and what I can't do, the do's and don'ts of coming into your building. Once I'm in your building, give me guidance, give me direction, teach me and show me, you know, hands-only CPR, hand washing techniques. You guys are all going to be wearing gloves if you choose to. If you choose to wear gloves in your facility, then are you testing those gloves to make sure there's no holes and cuts and rips, and what does that look like? So we've got to have a whole educational piece. Taking CDC posters, taking OSHA posters, putting them in your common cafeteria or spaces are really important, and give people direction. So you do not have to spend a lot of money on signs. It doesn't say that. They need to be visible, large enough for me to read, in a language that I understand, and feel free to start printing them off of your computer. Now, if they get torn or ripped or they start to wear out, your job is to what? Replace them. Use black Sharpie markers. But you've got to have your signage in place and what that potentially is going to look like in terms of guiding and reminding everybody in your building what they should be doing and when they should be doing it, especially since this is all new in terms of the habit. Now, where can you get more information? OSHA.gov has lots of quick cards and one-pages of free materials for you guys so that you can use them in your buildings and facility. This is multi-employer. All right. So multi-employer worksite means you've got me coming on your building, at the post office, you got the cleaning company, you got the vending machine guy. First of all, do you want the vending machine guy to still come or not? Yes or no? If you do, great. What are the rules? How does he enter your building? What PPE does he have to wear? Can he use your bathroom? You have to have all of these things in place. I would love you to see you put together a pre-qualifying questionnaire for your vendors, just like we did way back in the beginning. You know, have you been sick? Have you traveled the country? Do you have any symptoms? Maybe you're the company that's doing temperature checking. Temperature check everyone then if you're doing temperature check, not just your employees. So we go through the pre-qualifying questions for your vendors. Check on OSHA.gov to make sure that we don't have lots of violations, and that, because that's public record, you don't want to hire people that keep breaking OSHA rules. Make sure you have copies of my professional license certifications. If you're hiring someone to be an electrician, check on their electrician's license. You guys are hiring cleaning companies right now. Check and make sure that they've done hazardous communications training with their staff, that they understand what that means. Training records, yes, Yes, if you're hiring me for a job and I'm getting on your roof, you want to make sure that I've done fall protection training. How about asking your vendors, what is your COVID-19 safe safety plan? You're coming into my building. How are you keeping your employees safe and my employees safe the way you're doing work? Every company now, this is going to be standard across the board as an expectation about how everyone's keeping each other safe. Because if, forget COVID-19, I bring you into my company, you start breaking OSHA regulations, I don't stop you from doing it. One of my employees gets hurt, one of your employees gets hurt, either or, OSHA shows up. Guess what? Just because I hired you as my expert does not exempt me from the possibility of being fined or cited. Those days are gone. That's what multi-employer talks about. So we have to be responsible when we choose our vendors, and we have to hold our vendors accountable. We got to keep our eyes on them. If you're bringing a cleaning company in, where are their safety data sheets? What does it say? You don't want them to clean with something and have your staff come in on Monday and everyone get headaches and pass out. You need to know what chemicals they're using, how they're using them, are they using them the right way? Insurance, do they have insurance? Has it expired? And of course, everyone asks for my W-9. Housekeeping. All right, we got a few minutes. We're wrapping up 2 more sections as we go to the home stretch. I told you we were going to be moving really quick with this stuff, but I promised to slow down and really deep dive into these segments and the next ones and give you chances to ask questions. Your chemicals, whether it's you or your third party, need to come from the EPA website on being able to disinfect against COVID-19. This is all the things you need to be thinking of under housekeeping. How's trash working? What PPE do you need for trash? How are you disinfecting? What PPE do you need for disinfecting? Your front office staff, if they're going to start cleaning their spaces, they need to know and be trained in all this stuff as well. Not just your facilities people, not just your third-party cleaning companies. Where are we storing chemicals? Can we store ammonia and bleach next to each other? You're going to learn that. No, we cannot. So you might want to think about only having ammonia products or bleach products in your building unless you do real extensive training around the risks associated with that. The signage, and of course your safety data sheets, all part of the housekeeping conversation. Now underneath bathrooms and trash, here's what I'm going to ask you. We have enough bathrooms? Are we going to section off bathrooms and urinals? Are we limiting the number of people that actually can come into the bathroom at any given time? How often are they getting clean? Are you guys using blowers to blow dry your hand? Are you moving to papers instead? Do we have automatic dispensers in there? All of those little details now, again, about not sharing and not transmitting the virus among each other. You've got to look at what's happening in your bathrooms. The other thing you need to look at is what's happening in trash. And these are all administrative controls and engineering controls, the rules and plans that you guys are putting in place. So trash, are we recycling? Do we put liners? At what point are we emptying them out? Do we have covers on our trash cans? Are we pulling the trash through the building? I mean, are we taking stuff immediately out of the building? What's the criteria that says, oh, we can't put this in regular trash and leave it for someone because they don't know what's in there. Let us take it and put it immediately into, trash outside. What does that look like in your company? Okay. You've got to start having those conversations with your team. This slide is really great about telling you about hazardous communications. One, you have to have a written program. You got to train your people. You got to know what chemicals are coming in. You got to have an inventory of those chemicals. If you break them down into smaller parts, you got to have labeling systems for those secondary bottles and safety data sheets. It's really going to be important. Now, a lot of you probably have safety data sheets electronically available to your employees through a login process. Make sure you revisit that so employees know how to access it. If you're still putting them in the books and you have them tangible, which is one of the ways I like for a lot of reasons, but if you've got it tangible, make sure those are up to date. Make sure you add it based on the chemicals. Again, you might have one kind of chemical today, and then you might have to switch to a different chemical tomorrow because of supply chain issues. Make sure that you're training your people, keeping the safety data sheets in there and up to speed, and putting them in the right PPE along the way. So remember, the labeling system is the global harmonization, the pictograms. So make sure that your employees really understand what these pictures mean. They know how to read the labels as part of the training. And again, I don't care if you're using black Sharpie marker or something really fancy like this label on your secondary containers. You guys get to decide what to do it. Just make sure you have the right information on it and you train your employees in exactly what that looks like across the board. All right. Personal protective equipment. I have an entire segment dedicated to this because there's no way I can do it justice. But please realize all these things that we've been talking about, you're going to make lots of changes and add face masks, eye protection, eye shields, a face shield, gloves maybe. You have to decide what's going to work in your departments, in your building. At the very least, the governor's director right now is that whether we're inside buildings or outside buildings, that we're wearing face coverings, especially when we cannot maintain 6-foot distances. So here's your to-do list. You need to choose the appropriate PPE. I told you, get the right salesperson, make sure you're buying the right equipment. KN95s versus an NN95 versus a face mask versus a face shield versus vinyl gloves. Like, understand the difference between them and know what you're buying. You buy them, you pay for them at no cost to your employees. You got to make sure one size does not necessarily fit all. So you've got to make sure that you have the right equipment for all of your employees to be able to wear, and that when you give it to them, it doesn't create another hazard. How about if you guys give me eye protection and now it keeps fogging up? Now you've created a new hazard. So we've got to address that. That might not be the right eye protection for me. What kind of eye protection can you put in place under the COVID-19 or under what I'm doing so that it doesn't fog up and I can see? Training, you got to tell your employees how to use it, when to use it, what are the limitations, where to store it, how to clean it, and how do I get it replaced. This is all part of your PPE program. You got to spell it out, put it in writing. I would encourage you to do a PPE acknowledgement form and then get everyone through these trainings around the PPE segment. So this piece, as I mentioned, will be a separate component for you. Remember, you're looking for ANSI and NIOSH, and when you can't find ANSI and you can't find NIOSH, go look up the regulations on what's acceptable. There are some, we've expanded the boundaries a little bit on what we're allowing in the companies in business in terms of equivalency. Quick little thing, this is a home test for you. We've got masks versus respirators. Yes, that white N95 mask is not a mask, it is a respirator. It's equal to a half mask in terms of the regulations associated with having a respiratory protection program. Now, if you look at the other pictures, they all look pretty much the same, right? Yes, they absolutely do, except 3 of those pictures are respirators and 1 is a dust mask. 1, you do not need to comply with the respiratory standard written by OSHA, which has very specific, clear rules around it. And the other 3, you do. So make sure you understand it when you see N95 or not, what does that mean for your company and what are you required to do along the way? Here's your laundry list as we are coming down. Here's your laundry list. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. So under training, there's a list of trainings that need to happen under COVID-19. Even if you've done these, you need to redo these. Why do you need to redo them? Because you're presenting it in a different way. You're presenting it in a way that is going to help them protect themselves against COVID-19. Remember, the hazard and the problem is COVID-19. You might have done PPE training, HAZCOM training, hazardous chemicals training already. But guess what? You got to revisit that now and talk about it as it relates to all the rules and all the policies and all the changes that you guys are making in your building and facility. This is a more specific list for you to take a look at related to COVID-19. And of course, you probably have already started with this list and made some changes or tweaks. Having come to this webinar, hopefully, again, we filled your pockets up with things to have conversations about, as well as other areas you hadn't thought about or other areas that you've kind of been putting off because you didn't know how to start the conversation or you didn't know what changes to make along the way. I say use OSHA as your template of which you make these changes. Now, this is a lot. And we want to be able to help you along this journey. So we encourage you to reach out to an MAP partner who will walk you through this. We have been fortunate enough to take some of the safety stuff that we do that applies to helping you through your COVID-19 pandemic site safety plan and get some things approved through the Express Grant. If you're not familiar with that, that's funding for you. And so we strongly encourage you to learn about that if you're going to need some help along the way. If you are looking for training support and training resources, I put this link up here and I encourage you to Google search Department of Industrial Accident Safety Training Grant. Typically right around now in May, they will release the FY 2021 grant. And that is a grant that you can apply for all of the safety training that I've been talking to you about. All the training that you need to do this year into next year potentially could be funded and supported by this grant. So I encourage you to do two things. Take action, talk to the Mass MEP about getting support if you need it through the Express grant. And then of course, looking up the Department of Industrial Accidents. And if you decide to go that route, we hope that you consider us as a training vendor, Mass MEP and safety trainers to help you through those trainings that we have. So I said 1 hour. I knew that I was going to be moving at Mach speed to lay this out for you, and I think that we kind of made it. So I'm going to give it back to Haley and Matt, and I know that Christy, they've been doing a great job behind the scenes. Ask you guys to do the polls. They've got evaluations for you. Our job is to help read, interpret, organize, and hopefully present to you in a way that you guys can just take action. This is one more thing on your things to do. So we want to break this down into small pieces. Please tell us how we can help you break it down into small pieces. Haley?
All right. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Darcy, for being a part of the webinar with us. We couldn't have gone forward and done this without you being with us. And we use Darcy as a trusted third party with us. So I have put up a slide that shows you our information, how to contact us, and give you more details